Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Andre. Today we do not have a book review. We are not talking about words, but we are having a book chat, which is something completely different that we've done before. But before we jump into all that, don't forget, if you're new, subscribe, like the content, and comment away which one of the Wheel of Time books is your favorite. I kind of want to know that just to see what the percentages are. But moving on to the goal of this video, which is just to have a book chat about the first half of Wheel of Time. For the ones that don't know, Wheel of Time is an epic fantasy series written by Robert Jordan, and later on, once Robert Jordan passed away, was finished by Brandon Sanderson. It is considered by many as one of the big classics of fantasy. It is my favorite fantasy series. It's been with me for many years, and I've reread it a couple of times, and I'm rereading it currently, but I'm going to talk about my preferences soon enough. Talking about this series, this is a 14-book series plus a prequel, so a total of 15 books written between 1990 and 2013. But today I'll only be speaking about the first 7 books, and before you ask, yes, there will be spoilers for them, so be aware of that. If you haven't read any of these books, go read them. If you want to know my review specific for each one of these books, I have done one for each one of them, and you can see some thumbnails here of what they look like. The cards will be showing up, so just click on them and you'll be able to be redirected to those videos. And then once you watch them, come here and chat with me. So the books we're going to talk about today are The Eye of the World, The Great Hunt, The Dragon Reborn, Shadow Rising, Fires of Heaven, Lord of Chaos, and The Crown of Swords. Well, got them all in one go. I'm gonna split this video in 3 parts. So the first one, I'll pretty much talk about the books, what I like about them, the categories that I usually give, their scores, and then a second section of this video will be more about where my top 3 characters, moments, those sort of tops for these 7 books. And then finally, the last part will just be regarding the TV show that is currently on Amazon Prime, Wheel of Time, that is an adaptation of these books. So what do I think? Is it a good adaptation? What have they not done right? So we'll talk a bit about that. But let's get this show on the road with our first section. Having read this whole series and now doing a reread, I'm completely embracing this series with fresh eyes. I think that I can see its flaws better, but at the same time, I have a different appreciation for the amount of effort that was put into this series, with all its foreshadowing, with the amount of characters and character arcs that exist across the whole series. But in retrospective, I actually think that this series is composed of several small trilogies, except for the last book. So for these 7 books, we actually have the first trilogy, which are the first 3 books, then the second trilogy, which are books 4, 5, and 6, and then book 7 is the start of what I think is the third trilogy. So we're going to talk about 2 trilogies and a tiny bit. The first trilogy, which is again The Eye of the World, The Great Hunt, and The Dragon Reborn, are a good trilogy, are the beginning of an epic. I mean, The Eye of the World is pretty much a big homage to J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings with the Fellowship of the Ring, and we have several moments that are clearly inspired by J.R.R. Tolkien's work. Almost beat by beat, you can see how they compare with Tolkien's books. But I think that in this first book, we actually have some kernels of originality that eventually leads up to what Wheel of Time will be. And as we read The Great Hunt and The Dragon Reborn, we kind of go through its development stages, the growing pains, where it feels like the series doesn't know very well where it wants to go, and so it's experimenting with different things until it finally settles in its own globe, in its own niche, let's say. Because in the end, with the first book, we have that hero's adventure type of journey. The second book, we have almost a thriller type, and then the third book, we get back to that epic style. Plus, the format of these 3 books is kind of similar. We have our characters together at the start, then something happens, they separate, and eventually towards the end, they find themselves again with an epic battle that ends the book. Nonetheless, I think these 3 books are quite solid. They are fun, they're adventurous, and to start an epic series, it's always good to have this type of differences and try to find their own path to becoming a whole series by itself and not just a copy of another. I'll be putting the Goodreads scores here on this side so that you can compare with the scores that I gave. But so on Goodreads, these 3 books had 4.19, 4.26, and 4.27. So as you can see, the scores increase slightly as the series progresses and it becomes better. Of course, the scores are always a bit influenced because as people progress through the series, the ones that don't like drop out. So it's likely that the scores increase as the series increases. But to compare, my scores were actually 4.2 for the first one, 4.4, and then 4.2 again. I think the biggest strength in these first 3 books is definitely the world building. It's amazing how Robert Jordan is able to, with every book, it expands not only the space, the universe we're in, but also the magic and the culture and the countries and the characters themselves. There's a huge heavy lifting that the world building does, and that's amazing to see and explore as we go with the characters because they know just as much as we, the reader, do. So it's really fun to read. Then we have what I consider the second trilogy, which are books 4 to 6, and that is The Shadow Rising, Fires of Heaven, and Lord of Chaos. I think this is where Wheel of Time realizes what it wants to be and starts becoming its own self. It reaches maturity, it has matured throughout the growing pains, and it has become an epic in epic scale. And this is defined by the fact that we no longer follow the same formula that we were following in the first 3 books of our characters separating, going through adventures, and then coming back. Now our characters diverge, and some of them we don't see them reconnect for books ahead. So that's really a change that makes it sound like the books are taking their own path and adventuring themselves. Of course, not all paths are the same, not all paths are as good as others. Everyone develops different favorite characters, but that's the beauty of it because we have so much diversity in the story with so many different characters that there will be some characters that you'll enjoy and some that you won't. But there's almost guaranteed at least one that you'll enjoy. On top of that, the plot thickens. It doesn't become just the good versus evil. You start having so many different layers and weaves, politics, intrigues, that you actually feel like you yourself as a reader have to become an Aes Sedai to actually be able to understand all of that is happening and all the different factions that exist and good within evil and evil within good and evil and good and all of those different things come together. But I think that's the beauty of it because it shows a complex world, but it is given to us in a simple manner and it allows us to fully understand, not feel confused about what's happening, except maybe with the amount of characters that exist. But if you have some glossary or something like that, it'll help you out. But yeah, I think it's really good how these 3 books, books 4 to 6, show the maturity of Wheel of Time and how good it will become further on. And I think this is the point where you become fully invested in these books. I think if you reach book 6 and you are still not that grabbed by the series, then you probably won't be for the rest of it. Because by then, you will have created connections with characters. You will like some, you will dislike some, like I said. But at the same time, I hope by then you'll want to experience the world and experience all the cultures and everything else that is yet to offer. And plus, if you thought that the epicness wouldn't be able to increase, you're well mistaken because with every new book, there are memorable moments that shine in epicness, especially book 6. For these 3 books, the scores on Goodreads are 4.28, 4.20, and 4.19, which is funny because it seems that in the first 3 books, the scores increased, and now in these 3 books, the scores decreased. But for me, they were actually quite different because my scores were 4.8, 4.8, and 5. So I think book 6 is one of those perfect books that has a good mix of everything, and the epic moments towards the end are just they make me shiver, and it's always beautiful to read some of the sentences there. So as you can see, for me, this part of the series is pivotal for you to truly enjoy Wheel of Time and to understand how Wheel of Time will be for the rest of the series. And I think that's because not only the world building keeps expanding, but this time we have characters and plot come together and reach that same high level of quality. And then we have book 7, which I consider it to be part of a third trilogy, which is book 7, 8, and 9. So book 7 is A Crown of Swords. And I think book 7 suffers a bit for 2 reasons. One of them is that it comes right after book 6, which ends in a very epic scale climax. And so because of that, book 7 seems a bit more slow. But in fact, the other part of it is that this is actually the first book of what we call the slog, which is a portion of the series where things all slow down quite a lot. and that slog goes from the 7th to the 10th, some people say the 11th book. And so book 7 feels almost like the youngest sibling that sees the older brother get an award and get all the attention, and so the youngest sibling is kind of sad about it and doesn't get as much attention. But I still think that it has its qualities. I think this book has a lot of world building built into it, but also a lot of character development. So we sit with the characters that we already know, and we see them develop a lot into their values, their fears, what they're trying to achieve in this world, and we see them becoming the pivotal characters that they will be in the end of the series. But of course, because you don't know this, how everything will turn out in the end, you're reading this series for the first time, it will seem that it is very slow because you don't understand how impactful these changes will be. So it is not a surprise that this book on Goodreads has a score of 4.06 and my score was 3.8. It decreases quite a bit, but it's still positive. It's still a good score overall. So how would I rate all these 7 books? Well, I think it's pretty clear that I would put Lord of Chaos first because, I mean, it has the best score and I think it's the right combination of all the characteristics that I put in the book. So all the categories of plot, characters, enjoyment, writing style, and world building. I think in second place must be The Shadow Rising because there are just some plot twists that I love, and this was one of the books I reread the most when I was younger. And after that, Fires of Heaven, because again, it has very epic moments. There are some plot twists that leave your jaw dropped and you think, oh my god, how can this happen? And then there are other plot twists on the plot twists, so it's very good. So third place for that one. And I think in fourth place, I would put The Great Hunt, simply because I think the deviations that this book took, I like them. I thought they were completely different from the rest of the series. And if it was trying to deviate to another thing, this was one path that I thought it succeeded quite well. And then after that will be The Eye of the World, because it's the first one. It's always good to read and reread, and seeing those tropes played out so well, I like them. And after that, The Dragon Reborn, and finally A Crown of Swords last, simply because again, it suffers a bit from the epicness of the book before. But so that way we close our first section. Let's now talk about our second section, which are top moments. So these 7 books, and this is just the first 7, they are filled with epic moments throughout. So what are my top 3 moments in the series in this first half? So starting from the bottom, third place, I gotta say that moment in book 5, Fires of Heaven, between Lanfear and Moiraine is one of the best. And I think that followed with Samael and the Balefire fight, all of it was so epic, so unexpected. A lot of things happened that you just don't expect at all. Moiraine sacrificing herself, plenty of main characters dying, later on to be revived with Balefire, but still all of it was quite shocking and I really loved it. And looking back and rereading, you can see so much foreshadowing on Moiraine's part, and it's just beautiful and I really liked it. After that, my second moment is definitely the breaking of the White Tower and the mutiny. This happens in book 4, The Shadow Rising, and I think this caused so much impact in me because throughout the first 4 books, you always read that the Aes Sedai are always in control, they plot everything, they are like puppet masters controlling every kingdom, every ruler, everything. And then suddenly this super stable and super powerful state breaks down and divides itself. But then again, rereading this part and seeing all the foreshadowing that exists, you could see, the stones are crumbling and the tower is crumbling down and soon it will fall, and it's just beautiful in a sad way to see. And finally, my top moment must be in book 6, Lord of Chaos, and that is the Demise Wells battle. And of course, there's a lot of action in this part. There's a lot of shocking moments, but I think it's just the enormity of the consequences that come from this specific battle. Because I mean, we have the Ashaman killing people, killing Aes Sedai, and then we have also the Aes Sedai swearing an unbreakable oath to Rand of fealty, and it's just 2 things that are so shocking and so big because no one in that world would ever expect it to happen, that me as a reader, I feel just as much that shock and that surprise, and I keep wondering myself, how will this change the rest of the series? But of course, now I know and I can see how shocking it is for the Aes Sedai especially to have to do that, and how all the other Aes Sedai are shocked by the sisters that actually did it. And of course, on top of that, you have Rand's experience and Rand being tortured and put in a trunk, and how that created PTSD in him, and how that dragged along throughout the whole series to really shape him into becoming the Rand that he will be. I think that's one of the best hero journeys in fantasy, and I really love in a sadistic way how that moment was pivotal for him. What about top characters in this first half? I think all characters have great growth, some more than others, of course, but I think Robert Jordan did an amazing job at creating such a diverse cast. For this first half, my third place goes to Egwene. I think in the first book, she doesn't really do much, but from the second book onwards, she really takes a big role in the books. And I think she becomes so intertwined with certain plots, and her actions from those early books really have big consequences on how she behaves later on in book 10, 11, and so onwards. And I think because I always enjoy the White Tower and the Aes Sedai, Egwene behaves almost like a door towards that world, a door that opens into the White Tower, and I can see how all of that environment works. In second place, I gotta give it to Moiraine. Rereading the series, I understand her pain so much. Because I mean, trying to herd these teenagers and get them to do what she is telling them to do must have been such a hard task. Because as she is trying and telling them to do this, they are completely going the opposite direction and doing something else. Plus, Moiraine with her mysticism really becomes a mysterious and good character to follow. And if you're rereading, then all the foreshadowing just causes so much pain in you, because you know what's going to happen, and you see how much effort she puts into the world and into making Rand the Dragon Reborn, and the right Dragon Reborn to save the world. And finally, for first place, I'm gonna give it to Rand, because I think Rand goes through so much in this first half, and I mean, not talking about the second half. Of course, we always think that we would want to be the chosen one, and that would just be amazing and smooth sailing. But this series shows that being the chosen one might not always be that good, and you might also suffer quite a lot to be the chosen one and to save the world. And Ren represents that so well in all of the books, especially when you're destined to go mad and you go from a farm boy to the prophesized savior of the world. It must be quite the burden to hold on yourself, and I think you would all suffer or be a bit annoying like he is, according to some people. And I still think that, yeah, sometimes he behaves annoyingly, but I can understand the pressure that he must be in. And I mean, in these 7 books, with the peak of character level that we get at the Demise Wells from Rand, I think that just shows how big the range will be in the second half of the series. But so those are the top things that I wanted to talk about. Now going on to the last section, which is talking about the TV show Wheel of Time and compare it with the books so far. So streaming on Amazon Prime, this series has 2 seasons so far, and these correspond more or less with the first 2 books. And of course there's some details about future books, but those are not yet so prevalent. Starting with the first season, I think it was a good attempt. It had a few flaws. The One Power was one of the things I was very iffy about, because in some episodes it looked quite good, but then in others it was very flashy or weird in the CGI section, so it was ambivalent. And of course some character choices weren't really to my taste, like Lan being so forward with Nynaeve right from the start, where we know in the first 7 books it actually takes some time for those 2 to actually connect. But this is not to say that the Lan that Daniel Henney plays was bad. I don't think it was bad. He did an amazing job as Lan. It's just not exactly the Lan that I had pictured in the books in terms of personality. Books, I think that Daniel Henney plays an amazing Lan. And I think the choice of not knowing who the Dragon Reborn would be was a bit silly, because in the books we know immediately who it will be, and Moiraine knows as well that doesn't know exactly who, but she can immediately pinpoint who it will be. So it was weird that throughout the whole season we were supposed to not know who he was, and then towards the end Rand is just like, oh, I'm gonna volunteer and try to destroy things because I'm the Dragon Reborn and I just found out. so that part was a bit iffy as well. I did love Moiraine. I think Rosamund Pike plays her brilliantly, and the character choices were good for her, and I also love the sets. I think all the landscapes were beautiful. When we go to the White Tower, it's also really amazing. We see the Aes Sedai and the Amaryllis Sea, the Adjas, all of that. I think it was really well done. Some people don't like the cleanliness of the series, how everyone has their dresses always very clean and the places all look very shiny. I personally like that style, that aesthetic, but I can understand that it's not for everyone. As for the second season, I think it was a big improvement from the first. It still has a long way to go for me to think that it's just amazing, but it was quite a big improvement. Don't get me wrong, there are still some bad choices, like for example, Moiraine and Lan's arc. I think it was stupid, shouldn't have existed. Moiraine being blocked from the source doesn't really make sense, and then how easily Rand just unblocked it when he shouldn't be the one finding that out. I think those choices weren't the best ones. But on the other side, Egwene's arc I think was brilliant. I think she did an amazing job, especially with the Shan Chen and the Aidan, which I didn't really imagine the Aidan like that, but it was a choice and I appreciate that choice. But either way, Egwene's performance, brilliant. And then in this second season, we also have more Forsaken showing up, which I love. Initially, I wasn't very okay with Lanfear, but she won me over. And of course, Moghedien, I think, was brilliant, even though we only have a small snippet of her. But I think I like that interpretation of her, even though, again, it's not exactly how it is in the books, but it is a good interpretation. Now, in general, I do think that the series is deviating a bit too much from the books, which scares me because the series is so good, the books, so why do we want to change it that much? We should just follow the recipe. But let's see what the producer, the director does. I am keen to see how the third season will go. Hopefully we'll get it next year, and especially because this third season will include book 3 and possibly book 4, and new characters will show up, very important characters actually, so I'm really keen how those actors and actresses will portray them, because some of them are really good and I'm really excited to see. I just hope they don't do it too fast, because 8 episodes is really not enough. I think we should have 10 or 12 at least, and just enjoy better, flesh out everything better so it's not so rushed towards the end. But I think that's all I have to say about this series, and I've been blabbering for so long, so I want to know, what do you think? This is the chat after all, so comment down below anything about these 3 sections, the TV show, or what are your top moments, top characters, or even what do you think of these first 7 books, any in particular. Just comment down below. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, like the content, and I'll be seeing you on Thursdays and Sundays, okay? See you soon!